Welcome to 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy transition in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. So, 2022 was a big year for the energy transition. Big legislative achievements such as the Inflation Reduction Act made headlines. Major technological breakthroughs hit the headlines, such as when scientists reached an important fusion milestone in the lab late last year. And of course, the war in Ukraine turned the energy industry upside down and drove a shift towards renewable energy and energy efficiency and away from a reliance on fossil generation. What does 2023 hold for us? In this pod, we'll look back on some of those major news stories of the previous year and take a modest shot at what we could be looking forward to in 2023. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to reach Earth, or about how long it takes to run through 2 full renditions of Auld Lang Syne, one for the previous year and one to ring in 2023. Let's get it on. 2022 was remarkable for the energy transition in many ways, but also faced some big challenges. The war in Ukraine dominated global headlines and had lasting impacts on the energy markets. For one thing, the war created chaos in the pricing for energy flows, especially for natural gas. The IEA estimates that 90% of the rise in electricity prices worldwide is due to fuel cost turbulence due to the war. The World Economic Forum, WEF, modeled that 2024 energy prices are likely to be 12% higher globally than they would have been had no war ever occurred. But those price increases have led to a rapid transition for Europe towards more efficient and renewable sources of power. The demand for heat pumps in Europe doubled from as recently as 2019, and the development of new renewable energy projects have shot up. It takes time for those projects to come online, but the WEF says that the war has increased renewable projects by 20% and that renewable energy could make up 50% of Europe's supply by 2030. Here in the US, the pace of renewable growth wasn't quite as rosy in 2022. For the first time in years, our pace of development actually slipped, back to levels not seen since 2018. Supply chain costs, as in many industries, were mostly to blame. Despite that, though, renewable energy accounted for 23% of U.S. power generation during the year, and the IEA estimates that solar capacity could triple during the 2022 to 2027 timeframe. Lots of anticipated growth, but under the cloud of this inflationary pressure. The offshore wind market in the U.S. is a microcosm of this situation. In February, $4.4 billion was raised for offshore wind leases off the coasts of New York and New Jersey. The Biden administration held its first offshore auction on the West Coast this past year, and installation vessels began working in New England for large-scale wind farms. But inflation on an already high-priced power source dampened the growth story. PSEG, Ørsted, and a number of other wind developers expressed concern on the higher prices and the effect on projects and timelines. Which leads us to the other big story for 2022, which was the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act by the Biden administration. The IRA was the largest ever commitment of dollars to the climate crisis in history, funneling $391 billion towards the energy transition. The act invests billions into developing that offshore wind market, scaling up new renewable energy projects, lowering the cost of electric vehicles, driving energy efficiency measures. The future for the energy transition has never looked so bright. So let's pivot towards talking about that future and what we can expect in 2023. First, take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm hardly a good prognosticator to rely upon, but I'll give you a few good guesses on what we may see over the next year. Let's start with legislative activity, as the IRA and the now divided federal government means we're probably not going to see much more action on the federal level aside from disbursement and execution of existing legislation. Instead, the activity is likely to shift to states and even to municipalities who are looking to invest behind clean energy. For one thing, states are going to play a big role in the distribution of IRA funds, enabling certain priorities and projects to advance. But we can also expect some of the states to follow in the footsteps of Massachusetts, which enacted its own climate bill to invest billions behind EVs and energy efficiency. As for emerging technologies, 2023 is shaping up to be a banner year for finally scaling some long-promised, long-hyped tech. Forget about fusion for the moment, even though the Department of Energy's announcement of reaching ignition is a big, if nerdy, deal. Market-reliable fusion power is still years from commercial adoption. The real advance in 2023 is likely to be in batteries. both the moving kind found in cars as well as utility-scale batteries capable of enhancing grid performance. Wood Mackenzie suggests that 5.4 gigawatts of utility-scale storage came online in 2022, and that pace could significantly increase over the next few years. Sure, Bloomberg's analysis of rising battery costs is going to constrain that growth, but those analysts also expect price inflation to only exist in the medium term, which means that towards the back end of 2023, it could be a boom time for batteries. And that brings us to EVs, an area that's getting a lot of attention and could see another banner year. For one thing, let's be bold and suggest that the market will see its first under $25,000 EV by the end of the year. Tesla, for one, is developing a gigafactory south of the border in Mexico that could significantly reduce labor costs associated with producing their cars. And given how expensive EVs are against ICE cars, getting that initial cost down could be a big game changer. Those lower costs, though, aren't likely to translate to a significant increase of EV share of the market by the end of 2023. Not only will the domestic supply chain need to be built up in order to satisfy the requirements of the IRA's $7,500 incentive, but overall recessionary pressure is likely to squeeze higher cost purchases for the duration. That said, though, over 40 new EV models are slated to hit the market this year. Tesla has long dominated the US market based on an almost monopolistic control of options. 2023 marks the year we finally get alternatives, especially in the light-duty truck and SUV markets. So those are my not-so-bold predictions for 2023. Legislative activity shifts to the states as local governments figure out their project priorities. The battery market takes off, especially as prices begin to come down again in mid-year, and the EV market continues to mature, though not quite fast enough to meet the pent-up demand for EVs that exists today. The future for the energy transition looks bright, fueled by remarkable commitments and financing from governments and even corporations. Assuming the market can fight its way through the inflationary headwinds that are holding it back, it could be another amazing year. I'm Paul Schuster, and this is your 8 Minutes.